All right, everybody, ready to go? Are we ready? Are we ready to go? Rachel, you ready to go? All right, Kyle says, let's roll. All right. Hello, and thank you for coming. Thanks for stopping by. First thing, housekeeping. We always have to do housekeeping. This is being recorded. We just need to let you know that. That's what we do. We're planning to be here for the better part of the hour. Rachel has rehearsed her portion of this several times, and we think we'll come in about 45 or 50 minutes today, which leaves another 5 to 10 for Q&A and a little extra housekeeping at the end. So we're going to leave time for Q&A. We've already got some questions that have come in alongside some of the registrations, but if you have questions along the way, please throw it in the chat. Kyle's going to jump on later with us and help us walk through all the questions. Anything that we can't answer live today, I think we're going to stay for an extra 5 or 10 minutes if anybody wants to hang around. Anything we can't get to, we will follow up in an email with answers. So feel free to throw those in there. All right. By way of introduction, I'm Steve Kroll, co-founder and CEO of Be Found Online. My job today is to be the MC and facilitator. I'm here to help Rachel get from beginning to end. And really my job is to learn alongside everybody else. I might know a bit of this stuff. I've been through some of the rehearsal presentations and other, but every time I get to jump on with one of our fabulous team, I get to learn alongside each and every one of you. And it's always a wonderful experience. And Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the Director of Analytics and SEO at Be Found Online. Been here for a few years, but been in the digital marketing space for a heck of a lot longer.
We don't want to tell you how long. It feels like we're getting old. I will say that Rachel's been in analytics for a good long while and is very, very talented and also does a wonderful job of communicating her skill in analytics back to you. So I hope a lot of this stuff will make sense. And along the way, if it doesn't all add up, or if you've got a question, like I said, throw it in the chat down there or over there somewhere, wherever your controls are, feel free to throw it in. All right, I think, Rachel, this is where I give you control of the screen back, correct?
Yeah, and I think we're actually going to do a quick poll first.
Oh, that's right. All right, poll time. How do you plan to implement GA4? And there's going to be a follow-up poll later on too, another question for you. But right now, how do you plan? Internal, third party, you're not sure, or you've done it already? And if you've done it already, congratulations. That's pretty awesome. We almost done with the poll, Kyle? All right, 21 of you have responded. We've got about 30 folks on, so anybody else who wants to chime in, feel free to go ahead. But we're going to let the poll run for another 10 to 15 seconds. All right, we're gonna sharing the results. So looks like most of you are planning to implement GA4 internally. It's a fair amount of work. It's rewarding work. Rachel will talk a bit about it, about implementation as well today. Third-party team. We're happy to help if you need it. In terms of migrating, we've done a couple of migrations already. We're happy to help out. Unsure, I can understand that too, because there's a lot of news coming out on GA4 right now. And for the 3 of you that have already implemented GA4, awesome. Running side by side with Universal Analytics at the moment, or Jekyll Universal would be my follow-up question, just to, you want to compare your data sets, but very, very cool. Thank you for sharing, folks. We'll probably talk a little bit more about some of these things along the way. And Rachel, I think it's your microphone at this point in time to go ahead and begin the presentation.
Okay. All right. So unlike several of our other webinars, I'm actually just going to bring you guys into the platform itself. So let me know if you guys can see my screen. Can you see it, Steve? Got it. Cool. Okay. All right. So I'm going to take you guys through this pretty quickly. It's a lot of information to know. But the first thing that I want to do is today we're going to take a quick look at GA4. But first, I want to start out with a quick comparison between GA4 and UA, since most of us are probably at least somewhat familiar with UA. UA is Universal Analytics. This is the now older version of Google Analytics. So after we spend a few minutes doing that, then we're going to jump into some GA4 settings, and then we're going to dive right into the GA4 platform. So first thing that I should mention are the accounts that I'm going to be using. In some cases, I'm going to be using Google's GA4 demo account, which is pretty nice to play around with, particularly if your GA4 property is new. Then I'll also be switching in and out of an e-commerce business's GA account that we've been granted permission to share with you guys today, called Soothsayer Hot Sauce. So over on the left side, we can see that in both GA4 and UA, we have our main category options. UA has a few more options, but when we get started opening up some of the categories in GA4, we're going to see that most of what's included in UA is also included within GA4. Discover seems to be one of the main differences between the two. And here within the UA platform, this is where Google just easily links different marketing tool guides that you can use. So again, quick run through in UA, there's 5 main categories. And I like to think of these as what's currently happening on the website, who is on the website, how they got there, what they did, and then user engagement. In GA4, we really only have 4 of those main categories, as real-time is now included within this report section. And then when you click into one of these main categories, your subcategories are going to pop up on the right here. So let's run through the same thing that we did in UA and GA4. So for reports, this is an overview that allows you to get a snapshot of many of your different reports. This section contains pretty much all of the reporting from UA within it, including reports from UA's audience section, as well as conversion section. Explore. This is where you're going to be able to create custom reporting. In UA, this was this customized section up at the top. And then advertising. Advertising most closely relates to UA's acquisition section. So here you're going to be able to find traffic source information and pathways to conversions. And then configure. Configure is a little bit odd because it includes some additional functionality within the platform that was previously within UA's admin section or actions that you would typically take within Google Tag Manager. And this is where you're going to be able to find things like events, conversion, or audience data. And just note that you're only going to be able to manipulate or configure these different configurations within the configure section if you have the access level of editor or higher. So if you're an analyst, you're not going to be able to do as much within this section. But if you're the account owner or admin or editor, then you'll be able to configure some additional things within this section here. Now, just further exploring these 2 different platforms, we've got the search bar up at the top. Within UA, I didn't really use this section that much. I think because I was so familiar with the platform, but I find myself using it a lot more within GA4. And within this section, you can do things like search for a report, ask a question about your data, you can find insights, or you can ask for help. So I just want to take a really quick example of one that I like to do, which is location by city. So within this search here, I'm looking to see how the data is broken out by city. And we can see that it returns a few different results. One is this line graph with the sparkles, and I'm going to click on that. And we can see that this icon relates to insights. Insights are going to always pop up over on the right-hand side. And within this, Google is going to bring up the report that I'm really looking for. So here we can see that the data is broken out by city, and the metric is going to be users. But there's also a few different other options when that return within the results when I enter in the specific query. And one is going to be this bar chart icon here. When you see that bar chart, that is signifying that this is actually a report within GA4. And what I like about this is that GA4 is actually teaching you how to use the platform itself by giving you these breadcrumbs about where you can find the specific report. So if I click into that, then we can see the exact report that I'm looking for, which is just users by city. And another quick tip that I'm going to show you is that you can also do things like search for tours. And GA4 has a few different tours that you can go to. So if you're looking for any more additional information or help navigating the platform, just type in tour into the search bar and then click on one of these. And then, of course, admin is still at the bottom. It's still that same icon of the gear. And let's click into it so that we can see what the differences are between UA and GA4. And there's a pretty big difference, right? There's one less column within GA4. So there's no view column like there is within UA. That's because GA4 doesn't use views. Instead, you'll use the platform itself to filter to get those same results that you would get for different views. Now, I'm actually going to switch over to go through the GA4 settings specifically within our partner Soothsayer Hot Sauce, because I have a higher level of access here. So if I go into the Google demo account, we're not going to see all of the options there. And of course, again, there's only two columns within the GA4 settings. We've got the account column, which is looking at the account as a whole. So UA and GA4. This property column is looking specifically only at GA4 property. So again, just right here in the second column. I'm not going to go through the account settings only because this is the exact same as it was within UA. The one thing that you need to know is that when you go to all filters under accounts, this is only looking at filters for the UA properties. GA filters are not included within this section because they're a little bit more limited and they work with slightly different logic. Okay, so before we jump into the property settings, it's really important to note that GA4 is, of course, a property. So typically this will only track one website. However, if you're a company with multiple different websites or even an app, then you might choose to track all of your sites or app within this one property. And as long as those sites are all part of the user journey, that's totally fine. Another thing to note is that after you upgrade your account to GA4, you're going to need to implement your GA4 measurement property on your website in order to track GA4. So just because you have the UA code already implemented doesn't mean that your GA4 property is going to track. This is a separate implementation that you're going to have to do. Okay, so let's jump into the few differences in the GA4 property. And the first one is the setup assistant. So this option here actually helps you set up GA4 faster. Clicking into it, there's a whole bunch of items that are basically a checklist for things that you could implement or configure. So things like your tracking code, or you can configure custom events, or you can even link different accounts. Now,
Rachel, question for you as we go in there. How much
Sure.
how much do you need to know in advance before you jump into something like the setup assistant?
I would recommend that you have a pretty good idea of what your configuration settings should be looking like, and you have a lot of experience with UA if you're going to be setting this up. You need to have definitely more than like a base tech knowledge in order to do this.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so now let's jump into data streams. And data streams are a flow of data from your website or app into analytics. And when you first upgrade your account to the GA4 property, you're going to either see two different things. You might see just this one line right here, and this means that your data stream has actually already been created for you. That's what happens within this account for me. Or you might have three boxes here which say iOS, Android, or app. And you would just need to click into whichever option that you're looking to track, and then follow the guide that Google gives you to set up your data stream. It's pretty easy. Now, a single GA4 property, like we mentioned, can have multiple different data streams. So you can set up a data stream for your website, or you can set up another one for your app if you want. But a little tip here is that if you're one of those people that's using a single GA4 property for all of your websites, then you really do only need to set up one data stream for your site. Even though there's this URL down here at the bottom, that doesn't really matter too much. You're basically just labeling it. So you can include other data streams within this one data stream. And just to give you an example, just to add another data stream here, Google's going to give you this reminder that in most cases, a single web stream is going to meet your measurement needs. So no, I don't want to create another web stream, and I'll just click out of it. But let's click into the data stream. Another tip when you're actually creating your data stream is that you cannot change this data stream name. So when you're naming it, make sure that you're as specific as possible about what you're measuring. So include things like website or app. Again, this data stream was created for me, so I didn't have the option to create the name, but this one works and I probably wouldn't change it anyways. Okay, so let's get into some new features. The first one is this enhanced measurement, and this is actually pretty cool. In UA, the only out-of-the-box measurement that UA had was page views, but within GA4, they also automatically track things like scrolls, outbound clicks, site search, video engagement, and file downloads. And if you want to disable one of these different events, you just click on this little gear icon and simply toggle them on or off. So pretty easy here. And then you just click save. Now, be sure to note that some of these events do require some additional configuration. For example, site search. So for site search, you need to specify what the query parameters within the URL are after someone searches. And that's really only if you're not utilizing a common search query parameter, such as keyword. So after someone searches internally on your site within the URL, there's most likely going to be something like keyword equals and then their query. If it doesn't say something like keyword or K, then you need to make sure that you're defining this for Google so that they know exactly what the site search is.
In thinking about this measurement, folks, think about those new measurement opportunities, the scrolling and the video engagement that's baked into GA4. This stuff's going to make our lives a lot easier on the other side of this, trying to understand what our users are doing. How many people swipe their screen for scrolling now versus using a mouse sometimes when they're on mobile, or we're even scrolling with our mice today to understand that, and to be able to understand that in your data is going to allow you to make more intelligent business decisions.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so I'm going to jump into more tagging settings and then just walk you through a few additional cool features that GA4 has. So first of all, is this configure your domains. This is basically a built-in cross-domain tracking option that GA4 has. So no longer need to do an external configuration. You can just simply list the domains that you want to all be included and not have seen as external by GA. Defining internal traffic, it's exactly what it sounds like. So if you have a whole bunch of employees and you want to filter out their traffic, you can define this only by IP address at this time, but you still have the ability to do that. And then listing unwanted referrals. So this excludes any referral traffic from domains that you list here. So think about, like, if you maybe have a payment method through PayPal, you might want to include that as a domain to exclude. And then session timeout. The default is 30 minutes. So if someone is inactive on your site for 30 minutes without an event, then their session's going to time out here. You can leave it as the default, or just think about, how your site works. And if there's definitely like a possibility that someone's going to be inactive on your site for longer than 30 minutes, Perhaps you want to increase this time to an hour. And then lastly, enabling UA events. This is not recommended by BSO. And that's because events work differently in GA4 than they do in UA. UA had different levels for events. It actually had 3. So it had category, action, and label. In GA4, you only have your event coming through, and then you use either out-of-the-box parameters, so something like maybe page location, or you can set up custom parameters that you define in order to refine your data to make it more specific to your needs. Okay, so now I'm going to jump out of data stream. Let's go very quickly through data settings. So data collection. What you're going to want to do is make sure that this is enabled. So if you enable Google Signals, Google's going to be able to start collecting more information about your users, like demographics. However, this will only collect information about your users who A, have a Google account, and B, have the remarketing feature enabled. You can also do pretty cool things in here, like configure different settings for ad personalizations. So this allows you to export things like your GA audiences and conversions to your linked Google Ads accounts to deliver personalized ads. And let's say that you don't want to deliver personalized ads to every single location. Again, it's a really easy toggle on, toggle off system. But note that if you are using any personalized ads, you need to make sure that you are supplying consent within this next section here, that you have the necessary privacy policy disclosures on your website. So think GDPR. Data retention. Again, kind of exactly what it sounds like, right? So how long are you keeping your user and conversion data, such as user IDs? So for example, let's say someone comes to your website in November and then comes back to your website again in April. With the 2-month retention option in GA, GA is going to treat this one user as a new user because they're not storing that additional information on the user to be able to attribute them back to their previous sessions. So there's currently only 2 options right now, 2 months and 24 months. And then we have an additional feature down here that's called resetting the user activity or user data on new activity. If you have this enabled, basically what this means is, let's say we have someone again that comes to your site in November and then they come back in December. If this is enabled, this 2-month period time or 14 months, depending on your setting, is going to restart in December when the user comes back to the site. If it's not enabled, then Google Analytics is going to use that original session date from November. And then data filters. So you actually get one already created for you, which is pretty cool, which is internal traffic. Again, you would need to, within this data stream section, you would need to define what your internal traffic is by IP addresses. So if you're a large company, it might not be possible for you. But one thing that we will notice is that the current state is in testing. Now, what does this testing option mean? Testing option basically means that the filter is still collecting this data or internal traffic, but you're going to be able to identify the internal traffic by using this dimension of test data filter name. So if you really want to exclude the traffic from your data, what you're going to do is you're going to click on this active, and that's going to eliminate any of the data for internal employees coming into your site or coming into your GA account whatsoever. And
I'm sorry. I was going to say this is one of those features that saves us from ourselves a little bit, because previously we would set this up and we'd set up a filter and we'd screw it up, but then we'd have to remove it. And this is a way to test that filter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it's just a way to be able to identify what external traffic is coming to your site and what internal traffic is coming to your site. But if you don't want to collect any internal traffic, throw this setting as active. And if you want to include internal and external traffic into your reports, then you can select inactive. Okay, so like I said before, the filters within GA4 are slightly more limited. There's really only two. So we've got that internal traffic that's already created for us. Again, we have to define what the internal traffic is, but we then also have developer traffic. And this allows you, again, to specifically identify web developer traffic, which identifies the traffic through the events that have the value of debug mode or debug event. If you use GTM, then you're pretty familiar that when you're testing new tags, your URL contains these little parameters at the end of either debug event or debug mode. And again, when you create this, that default current state is going to be testing. So those same things apply to the developer traffic as well as to internal traffic. Okay. Now let's look at the reporting identity. This is how you would like to identify users. And the really cool thing about this is that unlike most Google Analytics features, this is retroactive. So within this first option, we're reporting on users across platforms based off of their user IDs sent for collection and Google signals for consented users when user ID is not available. If those two things are not available, then GA is going to use the device ID. Or you can select this one and Google Analytics is only going to use the device ID. Okay, let's get into a new feature, which is super exciting for me. We're talking attribution models here. So if you're an editor of the property, then you can select which attribution model that GA uses. Previously in UA, this was only last click. Your default option is going to be data-driven here. Anytime you see recommended, that's going to be the default for GA. And if you have any questions on what attribution models are, you can either click this link here, or you can email us after the webinar and we can help you understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, I was going to say bug Rachel.
Yeah, I love talking attribution models. Okay, all right. So if we scroll down, now let's take a look at the look back window. Look back window determines how far back in time a touch point, or when someone visits your website, is eligible for attribution credit. So for example, let's say someone visited your website multiple times in May, and then they convert today. With this 30-day option, Google is going to take that conversion and based off of what you have up here as your attribution model, it's going to attribute that conversion credit to multiple touch points over the last 30 days. And I say 30 days because again, the 30 days is selected here. So here we're defining really how far back in time Google can attribute conversion credit to specific touch points in the user journey. And then these are the same. I'm not really going to go through them. You can always ask us questions later on. And my last plug for the admin section is just to make sure that you can link any accounts possible.
Rachel, thinking about the look back window for a second and thinking about managing paid media campaigns. And this is where, and I'm trying to make sure I make sense of this, but what happens is on day one, we sell 10 widgets. But what happens is over the next 30 days, 5 other users who've clicked on those widgets come back over that 30 days. So our look back window collects them because we actually figured out they were on the site on the 2nd of the month and bought on the 15th, and our look back window collects them on the 2nd.
Kind of. I think I understand what you're saying. Let's say that someone comes to the website through organic on the 1st of the month, and then they purchase on the 26th of the month. That conversion of the purchase is going to be attributed back to all of those different touch points that happened over the last 30 days. So again, let's say that for our attribution model, we're using first touch. In that instance, the conversion would then be attributed to organic on that 1st of the month.
Awesome. Thank you so much for clarifying that for me.
Of course. Okay. All right. So let's actually jump into the platform because I think this is all what we really care about, even though settings are fun and you should definitely make sure that you check them out.
I'm going to do a quick plug here to say, hey, folks, we're about halfway through. Keep the questions coming. I see there are 5 questions in the chat window. If you have more questions, please add them. and we'll continue the dialogue with Rachel, and then we'll have time for questions at the end.
Cool. Okay, so jumping into this report section here, we can see that we're first getting a snapshot of many different reports that are to come in all of these different sections. If you want to jump into a report and do a little bit deeper of a dive, you can click on these links within the bottom of the cards. And then what's really cool is that you actually have the ability within GA4 to customize a whole bunch of these different standard reports that GA provides for you. And the way that you would do that is just by clicking into the library option at the bottom, and then finding whatever report you're looking for and clicking those three buttons or three dots and then edit. Okay, all right, so I'm actually going to switch back over to the demo account just because it's built out just a little bit more with more data. Okay, so let's take a look at the real-time report. What's cool about this is that within the real-time report in UA, this only reported on the last 5 minutes. In GA4, this reports on the last 30 minutes. You can also see some very obvious differences, like they include this kind of cool map feature in the background. But what I think is even more cool is that they've added this add comparison option. And what this allows you to do is to create a group and compare it to all users, or whatever type of comparison that you want. So within this, you can use up to 5 different conditions. And let me just show you really quickly how to do this, because it's super easy. So I actually I'm going to do country. And then I'm going to define the dimension value, or picking a few countries. So I'll do the United States, let's do the United Kingdom, and then I'll click OK and apply. And my view is actually going to change here. The map's going to go away, and we're going to see a comparison in real time of all the users on the site, as well as users only from the UK and the United States. So what's also cool about this is that this comparison will continue with you as you navigate through these different reports. Okay, just going over a few of these different reports more in depth. Acquisition. Same as UA. Within this section, you're going to understand how people got to your site. There's 2 different reports within here. This is a new one that was added by Google, so it's not standard, and you probably won't see it on your end. But we'll see one that is more focused on first-time users to the website. And then we'll see the traffic acquisition, which is just more based off of sessions in general. So where did all of your sessions start? Now let's look at engagement. And for engagement, what we're going to see is event and conversion data. And I'm actually going to remove this comparison, although I do really like that I'm able to see all of these different metrics over time with my comparison. So I'll remove that. And then within this event report, we can see how different events perform over time. I absolutely love this section. I think it's really cool. This is a report that I build out for a lot of clients in Data Studio. So it's kind of nice to have it in platform. And then conversions. Conversions are just basically more important events that you specifically tell GA are conversions for you. By default, there are a few events that are considered conversions, but GA4 does not automatically track them. And then pages and screens. This is where you're going to be able to find what pages users are visiting the most. We just need a little extra time for loading. Okay, moving on to monetization. This is where all of your e-commerce reports live. So you can understand things like what your most popular products are, or you can even look at this information by your advertising platform. So there's a few new metrics in here which are pretty cool. One is going to be this first-time purchaser. So I like that they included this new metric. And then here's another one, which is average purchase revenue per user. And then within this e-commerce purchases, let's jump in. This is another really cool report. So within here, you can actually see by item, how many times people viewed that product page. And then over here on the right-hand side, you can see not only how many times people viewed a specific product page, but how many times they added to cart. So you're getting some kind of cool different comparisons here.
And Rachel, if I had a group of products or a subsection of the website where I wanted to look at how tennis rackets were performing specifically against maybe other athletic equipment or golf clubs, I would be able to sort that out here and be able to see just that subsection?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, you could use the search bar right here, and then you would be able to filter for whatever you're really looking for.
Oh, making my life easier.
Okay, so if you notice, I skipped over retention, and the reason why is because most are under the impression that this section isn't super accurate, so we currently aren't really using this section. But let's jump into demographics. So the most important thing is that you need to have your Google signals enabled to get demographic data like age and gender. You can see that Google demo account, you're able to get location, but they don't have Google signals enabled. So we're not seeing things like gender, interest, or age. Now, there's a few other cool things that you can do. So now that we're kind of most of the way through the reports, I'm going to show you a few different of the functionalities. And Steve, you kind of led the way with that search bar for your last question. So within a card, I can actually alter how I'm seeing the data. So just by using this drop down, I can now see this data by new users. And you'll notice that within these other cards, I'm still looking at users. So it's only changing the card data information that I change that option in. And again, let's jump into a little bit more of the data specifically.
And don't worry, Rachel, we're doing fine on time. Go ahead and make your way through, and we still have plenty of time for questions.
Cool. Well, we've got a lot to get to, so we definitely need to speed it up at least a little bit. But yeah, so when we're looking at this demographic details, what's kind of cool is that you can also do things like add secondary dimensions here. Like in UA, you would see add secondary dimension. Here, you're just going to see that plus sign. And let's say I want to add in city. We can see that churning. And now I can see not only the country, but also the city and have the data broken out in a little bit more granular of a way. You can also do things like search the report, like Steve said. I actually don't like this function. So even though, Steve, you were saying it makes your life easier, UA, I actually thought had a lot better functionality. And the reason being is that in UA, we had this option just to search, right? And that, was pretty easy. However, we also have the advanced filtering option, and you can see we don't have that included here. So that advanced filtering option allowed us to more specifically pick out information within these demographics. So we could use things like regex. We could say exactly equals, or we could say contains. This search bar only uses contains. So let's say I want to look at the data by United. So we can see that we're getting information on the United States as well as the United Kingdom. And another cool thing about this report is, just like UA, you can adjust how many rows you're viewing, but this functionality is actually better than UA. So in UA, if I wanted to go to the next page of the report, I would have to scroll all the way down to the bottom. And I would have to scroll down through tons and tons of rows if I had increased how many rows I want to be looking at per page. But obviously in Ga4, they gave us the ability up at the top to be able to switch that page, which I thought was pretty nice. Okay, tech. So within this section, you're going to be looking at things like operating systems, platforms, browsers, or device breakdowns, so you can understand how your users are browsing your site. And then let's jump into Explore. So Explore, again, is where you're going to be able to create custom reporting so that you can see that data displayed and broken out how you want to see it. I think that this section is pretty helpful because it gives you a few different templates to work off of. Freeform is typically a table. This funnel and path exploration, which path exploration is more about like user journeys and how people go throughout your website. Both of these options weren't really great in UA, but these sections have greatly improved within the GA4 platform. And so I know we're getting a little bit limited on time, but I just want to show you really quickly how to create a report, because I think a lot of people are a little bit scared of this section of GA. So to create a report, I just jumped into that Freeform option, and we'll see that there's two different columns that are appearing. So within this variables column, this is basically saying, hey, I might want to use these different dimensions or metrics within my report, but I'm just not really quite sure yet. You can also do things like change your date range as well. So if I want to, let's say I want to add, I think like, okay, I might want to add a few different additional metrics. I can just click on this plus button and look at all of these different metrics that we're able to add. I'm going to focus more on events. So I'm going to add a few different event options here, and then I'll just click import. And you'll see that when I do that, these options appear down here at the bottom. There we go. But they don't appear over here on the report output. So next, let's go to the table settings. For table settings, you're going to be able to easily adjust which type of report that you're doing. Again, I'm going to keep it free form. You can change the visualization. So obviously this is a pie chart, not super helpful. I'm going to go back to the table. And then within these rows, columns, and values, this is where you're going to be able to define what your report output looks like. You can do this in two different ways. So I'll keep city as is for my dimension, and I'll start adding some different values in here. So the way that you're going to add your values or your dimensions, whichever case that you're looking for, into this report is either by dragging it over and adding it, or you can do things like double clicking, and you'll see that it just starts to appear. Cool. Okay, so now we've got at least a basic report kind of going on. Oh, you know what? There's no data in the first opens. I don't need it. And you remove it just simply by clicking on that X next to it. All right, so you can do things like changing the cell type as well. I love a good bar chart, but I also love heat maps, so let's use that. Okay, and then the last important thing to know about reports is that you can very easily add multiple tabs to reports. So you don't have to have 800 different reports. You can have one report with several different tabs in it, and you're just going to click that plus sign. Okay. Obviously, there's a few options here. This is where you'd go if you want to share your report, for instance. Okay. All right. So let's talk about this attribution. Attribution, again, is understanding the how different traffic sources are contributing to the success of your business. And there's two different reports here that they provide you. One is going to be this model comparison. What you can do here is you can compare different attribution models to see how different traffic sources perform. So the way that you would do that is by clicking either one of these drop downs and then selecting, a different attribution model. You might be looking at me and saying, okay, that data is the exact same as a different attribution model. Again, keep in mind we're in a demo account. So when you are playing around with this within your own GA4 property, this data is going to change for you. And let's say that, I want to look at only a purchase conversion. Up here on the top left, we can adjust which type of conversions are included within this report. So I don't want to include everything. I only want to look at purchases, and then I'll click apply, and we'll see that this data changes. So this is kind of a good way to be able to understand how different default channel groupings play roles throughout a user journey. I think we all kind of know by now that it's very rare that that a user goes to your website and then converts immediately. That just doesn't really happen anymore. There's typically multiple touch points.
As an agency, we wish it did a lot more, but it just
yeah. I think as business owners, they probably wish that it was a little bit easier to convert users. But
gave you $1,000. Where's my money?
Right, exactly. But I really love this report because it allows you to evaluate how different default channel groupings are a part of that user journey. So we can understand early, mid, and late touch points. So if I'm just looking at this, and again, just pretend that there's like a ton of data in here. Thanks for using your imagination. But just looking at this, I might say, okay, well, paid search isn't really pushing that many people to convert. I should probably pause paid search. Now, let's say that, we're seeing paid search is, similar to this direct bar over here in the late touch points, but it's in the early touch points. That would signal to me as an analyst, hey, paid search isn't really pushing people to convert as much, but it's getting a lot of people to my website, and it's more performing in terms of like brand awareness. So it's maybe not the last step in the user journey, but it's the first one that gets them to understand who I am and lets them know that I exist. And then scrolling down, we can see again more about user journeys here and how many times people come back to a website and what channels they're using to reach your website. Now, what's pretty disappointing here, at least for me, is that there is no search bar. And I really like to be able to understand how many times specific default channel groupings play a part within a user's journey. And that's just really not possible. I am hoping that GA4 kind of gets it together and adds this as a feature. So one thing, this is kind of like actually a really good point to point out that, GA4 is still very much under construction. So over the next year, before UA analytics is sunset, you're going to see a lot more changes within GA4. So no search bar kind of sucks, but one thing that you can do is just do Control F, and then you're going to have that little find search bar that appears. And I want to see how many times organic appears within people's user journeys. So even though I'm not getting that filtering option here, at least it's highlighted for me. So if I expand, this to 100 or 250 rows, I can at least go through and count the path journeys by using this highlight option. So a little bit of a hack, but still not super great.
All right, Rachel, quick time check. We've got about 10 minutes left in our session. I know we could talk about this all day, but let's figure out where we can sort of wrap it up and get to a few questions before the top of the hour.
Cool. Okay, so the last section is going to be configure. And again, this is where you have a few more options that you can do within the GA4 platform itself. Here, we're just going to be looking at a list of events or conversions. You can even create events within this platform. We use GTM, but it's possible. And then within this event section, you can actually mark any of these as conversions. So kind of cool to just have a very easy toggle on, toggle off switch of saying, this is a really important event to me. I'm going to mark it as a conversion. And then, oh, you know what? I'm actually going to jump over into the Soothsayer account, and I'm going to very quickly show you audiences. And then I think that's probably where we're going to wrap up for some questions. So bear with me while we're loading. Cool. Okay, so you can see that there's a few audiences that are already being collected in here for me by default. But if I want to create a new audience, which if you're running any type of Google ads, I highly recommend that you do this. Once you set up an audience, that's when the data starts collecting about that audience. You cannot set up an audience and expect retroactive data. That doesn't exist. But when you're building a new audience, you have a few different options of building from scratch or using some of these different built out of the box audiences that Google provides for you. So you can do things like group all of your people that have visited your website but not purchased, and then target them through Google Ads, which I think is pretty cool. And then last thing is this predictive audiences. So here we're able to target an audience of people that are likely to purchase within the next 7 days. So this platform is really powerful. So make sure that you're looking at these different predictive audiences and at least playing around with them to see, if you possibly want to use them in the future. Because again, this is not retroactive.
And I'm going to jump in here and say, this is a great place to think about your first party data. If and when cookies finally go away, yes, we might migrate to server-side tracking and some other things there, but the more first-party data you have and the more of this work you can do against your own audience, the better your marketing is going to be and the more efficient and effective your budget spend is going to be as well.
Yep, exactly. So within custom definitions, you can define custom dimensions and metrics. I think we all know that I don't have time to show you guys this, maybe in a future webinar. And then debug mode. So for those of you that use Google Tag Manager, this is where you're going to be able to make sure that all of the events that you're setting up in Google Tag Manager are funneling into your GTM4 account, or I'm sorry, GA4 accounts properly. You can even click on different events when you're in testing mode to get more additional information about them. Okay. That was a lot of information. So I know everyone's probably going to need to watch this a few more times just to fully absorb all of that. But that was a very high level but quick run through of GA4 versus UA.
And if you have questions, please chase us, hunt us down. I summarized a few of what I think are Rachel's favorite features here for you. These are things that maybe you want to go back and check out. We talked about attribution. You can tell how passionate Rachel is about attribution models and some of the changes they've made. Real-time comparisons, being able to follow you through as you're looking at reports, amazing stuff. And then the library too, just the ability to save templates or to borrow from theirs and make your own templates, pretty incredible stuff. And then the stupid simple stuff for me is integrated cross-domain tracking. I saw a question about a third-party shopping cart. This might make your life easier than integrated cross-domain tracking. I'm sure we'll get to that question in a bit. And then some of the events reporting that Rachel went into as well. And I don't know, Rachel, if there's anything else you'd add to your faves list or not, or if we should just dive right into questions.
Actually, I thought you did a pretty good job. Yeah, I think those are probably the main ones, but check back with me in a month and I'll let you know. It'll probably develop in that amount of time.
All right, this is a good spot for us to bring Kyle back in and facilitate the Q&A. I don't imagine there'll be any questions for me on this one because Rachel did such an amazing job with the material and it's so far into this. So let's roll up our sleeves and answer as many questions as we can. Like I said, we're recording and we'll follow up with anything later on if there's any extras that come up after the hour.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was incredible. That was so much information. Feel like you guys learned maybe 10 to 15, 20, 30, 50 new things today. I know it's a lot. We will send along the replay, but let's dive into questions here. Rachel, I have some questions that came ahead of the webinar that I think are going to be some like quick hits. And I think we can get through those before we get to some of these specific questions. So first question that we received was, if I do not migrate GA4 ahead of the UA sunset, can I go back and pull the data from the gap in between?
No, and I think that's a really good point to bring up because right before we started this webinar, I realized that we never talked about the sunset date. So the sunset date for Universal Analytics, if you didn't see that notification up at the top of the UA property, is actually July 1st of 2023. So next year, UA is going to stop collecting data, which is why we want you to make sure that you're getting your GA4 account at least started collecting data right now so you can get that year-over-year data. Once UA stops collecting next year as of, again, July 1st, there's no way to recover that information if you don't have your GA4 account set up. So as of July 1st of next year, you are being forced to use GA4.
Great information. Thank you. Related to both of the, or related to that, I've got a couple more follow-ups. So if I have GA4 installed now, should I remove UA?
No. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying, that GA4 is still under construction. I'm a part of an email list And I get maybe at least 3 emails a day of people, looking at GA4 and finding different issues or bugs. It is an amazing tool. It is very highly powerful, and we want you to make sure that you're setting up your GA4 property as soon as possible, but still keep your UA code on there, and just use both of them. And then once you feel very comfortable that GA4 is like working for you properly, everything looks good, then you can sunset. But to me, I would at least just leave it running through the sunset date of July. Because why not? I mean, you can run both at the same time.
Awesome. I think I know the answer to this because you kind of got to it, but in the case that someone is running UA and GA4 on their website at the same time, should they be dual tagging?
Oh, so yeah, you can for sure. We're actually still doing that for a lot of clients, only because again, GA4 is not our like main source of truth yet. For a lot of clients, we're still using UA. So you can still tag for UA and for GA4. In fact, I would recommend that. And then again, once GA4 becomes your main source of truth, probably in like 6 months, 9 months or something like that, then you can stop tagging for UA and only start tagging for GA4. So again, probably like 6 months, you can start tagging for only GA4.
Let me see if I understand that, just to come back to it real quick, is that we should plan to double tag for the near term, but also somewhere on that horizon, we should put in checkpoints to see when we want to sunset UA and make GA4 our source of truth. You can keep UA running in the background, but don't double tag everything after a certain point in time. And that's when you trust your GA4 data.
Yes, correct. And, let's say it's 9 months from now, and you're still dual tagging, you're really only going to get that event data for UA for a few more months, right? So it's kind of like wasting your time a little bit. You should probably, like in 6 months from now, really focus mostly on tagging for GA4.
All right, cool. So quick housekeeping. It is the top of the hour. We realize that some of you have other places to be. We want to thank you for your time. We're going to stick around and answer the rest of these questions, but then we're also going to pull all of the Q&A out of the video and share that as well with everybody who attended and everybody who didn't, just so everybody's got a copy of it. So drop off if you must. We miss you already. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to stick around and see if we can't get through a handful more questions. If you're willing to join us, please stick around.
Yep. And I also want to know, we'll continue to record this. So if you ask one of these questions and you have to jump, it will get addressed and we will speak to it. So just wanted to mention that before we keep rolling. Steve, you had mentioned looking to the horizon for the sunset. Rachel, I feel like this is a related question to that. So will retroactive Google Signals data be implemented when it's in?
That's a great question. So most of Google Analytics' settings are not retroactive. So I would say once you create your G account, the first thing that I would do would be to enable Google Signals. So you're starting that data as soon as possible, because it's not going to be retroactive.
Okay, good to know. I think the analogy we were talking about earlier today was turning the faucet on before the water starts running, just so that you can start filling up as soon as that green light turns on.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to jump into the audience questions here, and actually I'm going to put on my BFO hat for this one. All right, so we had a few specific questions here from the audience. Brian K is asking, well, there's a little bit of background and then a question here. So I work at the Better Business Bureau, and the organization doesn't allow individual BBBs to implement tracking on our local pages. I took the opportunity recently to make a GA4 account to monitor traffic and collect data on users that come to our third-party online application pages. Google requires us to be compliant with their privacy and data collection policies. So the question is, do you folks have an example of what those disclosures look like on a landing page?
Oh, okay. So I think here we're kind of getting into like almost GDPR, right? So we're talking about like what those disclosures look like. Yeah. So when you're thinking about this, when someone goes to your website, you want to make sure that you're having a pop-up that says, hey, this website uses cookies, and then, listing possibly like what you're using those cookies for. And the most important part is that you have the ability for someone to either accept those cookies, manage those cookies, or deny those cookies. And deny those cookies is going to be the most important part. So yes, we do have an example of kind of that like language, but I think we might need to like follow up for specific wording, because Brian, I would not recommend just using exactly what I just said there. Guys, can we maybe take a note of that and then we can follow up with that later on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, and I mean, as we know, GDPR compliance and good practices are very important. So if you're not thinking about those, we definitely recommend looking into it. All right, moving on. So this is a question from Julia in regards to scrolling. So for scrolling, can you touch on this a bit more? As in, is it only tracking when the user hits the bottom? Or can you tell if people are bypassing your content to get to the bottom and then bouncing off page?
That's a really good question. So with GA4's built-in function of tracking the scrolls, it's really only tracking when someone reaches about 90% of the page. In GTM, you can do things like more specific measurements. So, understanding when someone hits like 25% of the page, 50% of the page, 75% of the page. I probably would no longer do that type of tagging anymore. And I would just rely on that 90% so that you can understand, how long or how far someone gets down on the page. And then there's another question associated with it, right?
Yes. The two questions were, is it only tracking when the user hits the bottom? And additionally, can you tell if people are bypassing the content to get to the bottom?
So for that, I would look at, how far they're scrolling. And then I would use that in conjunction with, how long someone's been on the page. So you're going to be looking at two different metrics. So you're going to need to kind of meld things just a little bit. It's going to be like that dimension of the scroll, and then the metric that you're going to be looking for is how long they're on the page.
Awesome. That's really great insight. We've got a few more here. So this one, and maybe this might need a little bit of clarification, but David is asking, what do I need to do if I have a third-party ordering system?
Probably a lot. I would say kind of the main things that you're going to want to do is make sure that you have cross-domain tracking enabled. After you go again into the data streams, scroll all the way to the bottom, and then you'll see more tagging settings. Click into that, and then the first option is going to allow you to define different domains that are associated through like that user journey. So make sure that you're adding that within there so that if someone's going to that site and then maybe bouncing back, it's seeing that as like part of the user journey. But I assume that you're also going to want to make sure that there's tracking getting pushed back to Google Analytics. And that's going to require some more like GTM tagging and figuring out what those different parameters that you want to collect are. That's a little bit more complicated of a answer. So I would say give us an email and describe your situation a little bit more, and maybe we can kind of help walk you through it a little bit more in depth.
Great. A couple more here. Thank you so much for sticking around. I appreciate all of this. Another question from Julia. Are there benefits to resetting the retention data?
Only if you want to make sure that you're collecting the user information for longer. So it just kind of depends on what you're really looking for. Basically, this is just the retention period for data that allows you to understand, if people come back to your site multiple times throughout that journey, to keep all of that data collected so that GA doesn't look at that person each time as a new user. So if I set this to like 14 months, if people come back to the site like maybe every quarter, GA is going to be able to understand that this is not a completely new user to the site. It's someone that is returning and coming back. So I think that there's definitely a benefit to it. And And I would probably adjust this one to 14 months just to be safe and just to make sure that we're keeping that user data to get to understand returning versus new users in the best way possible.
Cool. All right, 2 more, Rachel. You got it in you?
Sure.
Awesome. We have from Andrew is asking, this was in reference to when you were talking about internal and external traffic. What if we are on dynamic IP addresses?
Ooh, that's a rough one. You might be a little bit out of luck. And that's only because GA4, again, it's fairly limited. What I recommend that you do is first go into GA4's settings, and actually, let me get there really quickly and I can kind of show you what the options are.
I'll jump in here too. So if you're a company and you're working with a dynamic IP address, you should be able to input a range of where your IP address is going to fall. So through network address translation, you're coming out as an internal address and you're getting sent as a public address. Oftentimes that's a many to one translation. So everybody from your company is getting a 1-to-1 address translation. It's also very true typically that your ISP will have given you an address block to use. So you can always check. There might be just one address in there. There might be 10, there might be 100, and you should be able to filter all of those for whatever your network gets translated to. And if you're using a giant cloud network in multiple locations, a lot of the natting that happens in there, you're still using a very similar IP block. So you can talk to your security folks and find out what you're being seen publicly as if you're coming out. Now, if you're at home and you're using Comcast or AT&T, all bets are off, because if you create a large filter, you're cutting out your audience too.
Right, exactly. But actually, you did a way better job than I would have. So thanks for taking that question. But if you're jumping into, again, defining your internal traffic, there are a few different options. Like Steve said, if you're getting that block, you could start using some of these like match types, like begins with or ends with, something like that. But it is a lot harder with more people working from home, right? We have a few clients that are like hundreds and hundreds of employees, and it's just not really possible with everyone working from home to filter out all of that internal traffic. Unfortunately, it's fairly limited, but hopefully it gets better over the next year.
That was super informative. I got the last question here. This is from anonymous attendee. With the new format of conversion setup, what would be a good way to audit and optimize the types of conversions to track, given that one-to-one goal transfer might not be possible from UA to GA4?
So this is a really great point, because GA4 is based off of event hit limits. And so you're totally right. You don't want to just say, okay, because I'm tracking in UA, I want to start tracking this in GA4. The best way to really do it, unfortunately, is manually. So we have a few like really big clients that we're currently doing this for, and we have to go by line and evaluate, like, do we think that this is important information for us to track? If not, move it to another tab. If we do think that it is important to track, we'll move it to like the, yes, we got to start tracking this. And then have a middle one of where you're kind of looking at it and like, I don't know, I don't really use this data. So you can then use that middle tab of where you're not quite sure to see whether anyone else in your organization is using that type of data. You'd be surprised that like some metrics are super important to like your marketing group, but you know, to like your content group, it's not that important. So I would just recommend using a spreadsheet, having all of the tags that you have listed out, and then starting to organize them into those different tabs. But yeah, good luck. We're going through it right now, and it's totally manual. It's a lot of work. So just make sure that you've got good headphones and just like plug away at it.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Call
Rachel.
somebody who has good headphones and is willing to plug away at it for you.
Absolutely. Took the words out of my mouth, Steve. Rachel, thank you so much. That's all of the questions. Oh, you know what? We've got one more. We've got one more here. You know what we're going to do? I'm going to take this last one and I'll include it in the follow-up with all the questions. Rachel, maybe you and I can just talk this one offline.
Okay, cool. All right. That sounds good.
Great. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out today. I know this is a lot of information. We're very, very fortunate to have such an expert here talking today. If you want any other follow-up information, if you want to continue to discuss anything analytics, SEO, paid related, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at webinar@befoundonline. You can also email me directly at KyleBeFoundOnline, and I can make sure to get your emails where they need to go. So we really appreciate you sticking around. We know this is a lot of information, but we truly understand how important this is to all of you. So thank you for joining.
Can I do one shout out? Congratulations to Shanice on graduating yesterday. So I see that she's in the attendees. So I just want to say congratulations.
Oh, okay, that is a heck of a way to end. Yes, congratulations. That is amazing.
Congratulations, Shanice.
Yep. So keep an eye out for the follow-up. We'll send the replay video, supplemental PDF with some added information, as well as addressing these questions that were asked, and keep an ear out for the next webinar. It will be around SEO and content. So keep an ear out, and thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, folks. Make those clicks count.
Bye. Thanks.
Take care.